Hey everyone, welcome back to Steve's View. Today I want to talk about something that has quietly shaken the entire transatlantic world. And yet, I think most people are still misunderstanding what's actually going on. Just days ago, the Trump administration released its new national security strategy, and buried inside that document was something extraordinary. For the first time in decades, Europe is no longer treated primarily as America's greatest strategic asset. Instead, Europe is described as weak, declining, culturally unstable, even facing what the document calls a form of civilizational decay. That language alone has already caused a political earthquake. So the obvious question everyone is asking is the United States abandoning Europe? Is this the beginning of a real transatlantic rupture? And if so, why now? Today, I want to argue something more uncomfortable, and I think more accurate. This is not about America walking away from Europe. This is about Donald Trump trying to remake Europe. And once you see it that way, the entire strategy suddenly makes a lot more sense. For decades, American foreign policy rested on one central assumption: America's greatest advantage over its rivals, especially China, was its alliance network. And Europe was the crown jewel of that network. Even the Biden administration repeated this constantly. China lacks allies, America has them. And Europe was proof of American leadership. So when the new strategy document suddenly frames Europe not as a strength, but as a liability, it feels like a complete reversal. To many observers, this looks like a betrayal of NATO, a retreat from global leadership, or simply Trump blowing up alliances out of impulse. But here's the problem with that interpretation. It assumes Trump is acting emotionally, not strategically. And whether you like Trump or hate him, that assumption has repeatedly led analysts to misread what he's actually doing. Let's be precise. The document doesn't just criticize Europe's defense spending or economic stagnation. It goes much further. It claims that mass migration has weakened European cohesion, overregulated governance has strangled innovation, political legitimacy is eroding, and that American taxpayers should not indefinitely subsidize this trajectory. Most controversially, it questions whether Europe, as currently structured, is even worth defending at the same level as before. That's not just policy disagreement. That's a challenge to Europe's political model. To understand what's really happening, let's walk through how three major Western outlets have interpreted this shift, and why I think only one of them gets close to the truth. 1. The Wall Street Journal. Trump is right, but for the wrong reasons. The Wall Street Journal took a surprisingly nuanced position. On one hand, it acknowledged something European elites rarely want to hear. Europe's growth has stalled. Its welfare states are expensive and rigid, taxes are high, innovation is lagging, and defense spending remains politically painful. The journal even pointed out something crucial. Europe's biggest problem may not be migration itself, but the welfare systems that incentivize dependency, suppress labor markets, and require ever higher taxation. So far, so good. But then comes the journal's main critique of Trump. It argues that Trump misdiagnoses Europe's problem by focusing on immigration and culture rather than welfare state economics. And here's where I disagree, or at least where I think the journal misses something important. Trump is not ignorant of Europe's welfare state problem. He's avoiding it. Why? Because welfare reform is politically radioactive, not just in Europe, but in the United States too. Criticizing migration and culture is politically easier, emotionally resonant, and electorally effective. So this doesn't explain why Trump is attacking Europe now. It only explains how he's doing it. 2. Bloomberg. The White House misunderstands Europe. Bloomberg's argument is more straightforward. It says the Trump administration is making three major errors. Europeans don't actually resent the EU as much as Washington thinks. Trump is courting the wrong allies, nationalist parties that aren't necessarily pro-American. America and Europe have always had different values. So framing this as a sudden betrayal makes no sense. These points are not wrong, but they suffer from the same flaw. They describe long-standing realities. They don't explain why Trump is suddenly willing to escalate them into a strategic confrontation. Europe didn't change overnight. So why did U.S. policy language? 3. The Economist, the first explanation that actually fits. This is where The Economist offers something different. Instead of framing the issue as America versus Europe, it reframes it as Trump versus Europe's political establishment. That distinction changes everything. The Economist focuses on something the other analyses largely ignore: the rise of nationalist and populist parties across Europe, the growing frustration of voters with stagnation, regulation, and elite governance, and the fear among Europe's mainstream leaders that they are losing control. In Germany, France, and Britain, establishment parties are openly warning of collapse if these movements gain power. And here's the key insight. Trump is not afraid of those movements. He sees them as allies. So let's step back and ask a more uncomfortable question. What if Trump isn't trying to weaken Europe, but to change who runs it? Think about Trump's consistent worldview: skeptical of supranational institutions, hostile to bureaucratic governance, favorable toward national sovereignty, deeply critical of welfare state expansion, and openly supportive of populist conservative movements. Now look at Europe today. The EU is the embodiment of supranational governance. Regulation is centralized, welfare systems are expansive, and political elites are deeply hostile to populist challengers. From Trump's perspective, this Europe is the problem, not Europe as a civilization, not Europeans as allies, but Europe as currently governed. So the harsh language in the national security strategy starts to look less like abandonment and more like pressure. Pressure designed to undermine the legitimacy of Europe's current elites, encourage nationalist conservative alternatives, and reshape the ideological balance of the continent. Now let's be fair. Critics will immediately say, "You're giving Trump too much credit. This is just emotional politics. There's no grand plan here." And that criticism deserves a serious response. Because here's the truth. Trump does not operate like a traditional strategist. There is no elegant whiteboard plan, no carefully sequenced doctrine. But that doesn't mean there is no logic. Trump operates through pressure, disruption, and alignment. He breaks existing arrangements, creates instability, and then backs the actors who align with his worldview. We've seen this domestically, we've seen it with trade, and now we're seeing it with Europe. Now this is where the analysis needs to stay honest. Because even if Trump's logic is internally consistent, that does not mean it's guaranteed to succeed. There are serious risks. Risk number 1. Europe's populists may not be pro-American. Many of these movements are skeptical of NATO, ambivalent toward U.S. leadership, focused inward, not outward. Supporting them could weaken transatlantic coordination rather than strengthen it. Risk number 2. Strategic drift is real. Even if Trump doesn't intend to abandon Europe, policy outcomes matter more than intent. Reduced commitment can become self-fulfilling. Europe hedges away from the U.S. Defense coordination weakens, and adversaries exploit the gap. Risk number 3. America is not immune to the same problems. Here's the uncomfortable irony. The very issues Trump criticizes in Europe, expanding welfare, political polarization, institutional rigidity, they exist in America too. So the line between critique and projection is thinner than many want to admit. From Beijing's perspective, all of this looks like a gift. Western unity cracking, allies fighting, the U.S. attacking its own partners. But that interpretation may be dangerously premature. Because if Trump succeeds, even partially, in reshaping Europe ideologically, the result may not be a weaker West. It may be a more fragmented, but more confrontational one. A Europe less bureaucratic, more nationalist, more skeptical of China, and less interested in economic entanglement. Short-term chaos does not equal long-term advantage. So let me be very clear about my conclusion. This is not a story about America walking away from Europe. It's a story about America, under Trump, trying to decide what kind of Europe it wants to deal with: a centralized, bureaucratic, welfare-heavy Europe, or a looser, nationalist, conservative one. Whether that strategy is wise is an open question. Whether it will work is even more uncertain. But one thing is clear: this is not accidental, and it is not impulsive. It is a deliberate attempt to reshape the political landscape of America's oldest alliance. And that makes this one of the most consequential and least understood strategic shifts of our time. If you found this analysis useful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. And as always, I'll see you in the next one.